introduction, which I'm going to read. But before I do that, I just want, on a personal level, in one of my last acts as past president, earlier Mary Ann acknowledged the engagement and dedication of the board. And over the last 4 years, there's nobody who's been more engaged, more dedicated, more hardworking to the success of this organization than Mary Ann. I would just like to formally acknowledge that. And now for the formal introduction. Mary Ann Battle is a historian and assistant vice president with Wells Fargo Historical Services, part of enterprise marketing for Wells Fargo Bank N.A. Mary Ann directs research activities for Wells Fargo Historical Services, supporting bank-wide marketing, recruitment, corporate communication, and legal activities, in addition to creating exhibits for Wells Fargo's 9 museums and many corporate spaces across the country. Mary Ann started her career at Wells Fargo in 1990 as an exhibits contractor and joined the Historical Services team full-time as a curator in 1993. In 17 years of interpreting Wells Fargo history, Mary Ann has learned more about horses and stagecoaches than she ever thought possible, and has produced many museum exhibits and publications, including the company history book, since 1852. It's my pleasure to bring to the podium Mary Ann Battle, who will deliver her presidential address, Sticky History, Connecting Historians with the Public.
Thank you, Bill. I will refrain from making any more jokes now that I'm supposed to be serious about this. So. Thank you for that very gracious introduction. The dogmas of the quiet past are inadequate to the stormy present. Although this quote by Abraham Lincoln might in many ways describe our world today, Lincoln's words could have also applied to those in the historical profession seeking to forge a new path called public history 3 decades ago. Delivering this address as president of the National Council on Public History as we mark our 30th year, I, of course, have the benefit of hindsight and can look back at what the organization's leaders said about NCPH and public history in years past. In 1989, NCPH's then chair, Barbara Howe, reflected on the organization's first decade, its amorphous beginnings as a loosely organized network, discovered, often serendipitously, by those trained in history but working in settings outside of academia, in jobs sometimes described as alternative careers. As momentum grew behind the notion that historians as professionals and not just as scholars should play an active role within a broader society, and as those engaged in such work recognized a community of others engaged in similar work, practitioners began to increasingly adopt the mantle of what Robert Kelly, Wes Johnson, and others had dubbed public history. This diverse group banded together to form a cooperative association, and the National Council on Public History incorporated in the District of Columbia on May 2nd, 1980. There were birthing pains in these early years for sure. Steering committees, an acting board of directors of 32 individuals, do-it-yourself financing, and various configurations of both management and membership as we grew from a council of volunteers into a membership organization. NCPH had bylaws, a logo, code of ethics, guidebooks, and publications, annual meetings, a few summer institutes, a quarterly newsletter, and of course one fine journal, The Public Historian, first published in 1978. By the time the new millennium and NCPH's 20th year came around, NCPH still had most of those things, plus the first in a series of long-range plans mapping out our strategy for the continued growth of the organization. We had additional tools for connecting public historians through a listserv on our website, and public history interest sections had taken root within scholarly organizations. And we'd attracted a new generation of public historians like myself, who were the beneficiaries of that movement given name and nexus by those pioneers of public history in the late 1970s and early 1980s. Public history is often described as a movement in those formative years. And perhaps at that time it was a movement, a force for social change, as much as it was a groundswell of awakened identity by individuals joining together and pushing mightily to shift the paradigm of a profession. Initially, there was a practical aspect to public history as well. As a response to a job crisis of the mid-1970s, when universities churned out hundreds of newly minted history PhDs with no place to go. Or so they thought. For in reality, there had been historians working in government, business, museums, and historical societies, and other non-academic settings all along. Historians who had proved themselves in many roles, influencing policy and informing decision-making in government agencies, business, archives, and nonprofits. It was this diverse group of history practitioners who had a broader, more holistic vision of the role of historians, those in the private sector and the public sector, and others within the academy as well, who continued to coalesce around this new association promoting the utility of history. Now, 30 years later, public history and those who, in the words of Ed Linenthal, commit history in public, have become firmly entrenched and widely accepted, even if, as past NCPH presidents have observed, the public may still view us all only as historians. Drinking time, sorry. I work as a historian in a large corporation whose primary mission is not history, education, or museums. And although history certainly has an established role, I inhabit largely a marketing world, experiential marketing to be exact, existing within a sales culture. Like many other public historians, I seldom get to pursue research topics of my own choosing. I get involved in far too many marketing and media projects that usually, but not always, actually involve history. Some of these projects and the marketing and consumer behavior research around them I find can actually be pretty fascinating. And sometimes even retail models can be useful in certain aspects of exhibit planning, such as wayfinding and typography, for example. For museum visitors are consumers, regardless of whether or not we identify them as such. My marketing experience has sometimes led me to ponder the marketing of public history, not as Bob Kelly did in 1976 on the prospects of public history, but why is it so hard to explain what public history is and what public historians do?